Welcome everyone to the Chicago Football Connection podcast. I'm your host, Steve Letizia. Follow me on Twitter at CFC Bears. Joined by my co-host, Luke O'Grady. Follow him on Twitter at Luke O'Grady. And we took a week off, but we're back now that the Bears have finalized their 53-man roster, or at least as we speak right now. I'm sure they'll make more moves, but as of right now, it is a finalized 53-man roster, so we wanted to give our reactions to that. Other big news is we had a trade in the works, trading a 6th-round pick for Dan Feeney with the Dolphins. Also want to talk a little bit about Tevin Jenkins and the injuries, and obviously the waiver claims today. So got a bunch of things to talk about. We don't want to go too long, but we wanted to talk about all the news here. So Luke, I would say my initial reactions of the 53-man roster was there's no really big surprises.
No,
It
I
was
think
pretty straightforward.
yeah, agreed. I think the big one that kind of had people talking was the way that the Bears treated the backup quarterback position.
Yep.
They had a couple of pretty good vested veterans on the team, and for a rookie, an undrafted rookie, to beat them out for the initial 53 is pretty impressive. I would imagine, honestly, that the way they treated these like the backup situation with Nate Peterman was that they probably do intend to keep all three on that with that extra spot all the time, but there
Mhm.
probably was a little bit of fear that if they let Bajent go to the practice squad, or like let him go initially, that someone might claim him a lot faster than someone that people feel like the verdict is out on with Peterman.
Yeah.
So it was a nice nod to him to make that 53. I think it's probably, it was either going to be Peterman getting cut or Bajent getting cut, but both will probably come back and round out that three-man quarterback room. But
For
yeah,
sure.
other than that, I think, it looked like the writing was on the wall for Vilder and Gibson. If you hadn't been paying attention to Twitter, you probably would have been surprised by that move. But it did look like the writing was on the wall with, some of the comments that he made and some of the reports coming out of the Bears brash that they were shopping him around. Poles did come out today in the presser and say that while Gibson never really requested a trade, it was something they were exploring just due to his success and
Yeah.
how they kind of felt that maybe his best work was done when they were the 3-4 and not a 4-3. So other than those two, I think everyone else kind of was who we thought they would be. It wasn't a very, very exciting cut down day, despite the fact that it was like the new, like, everyone has to go down on the same day thing. I
Yeah.
think there wasn't any huge needle movers that were released. There were a couple surprise rookies that maybe were worth taking a fly on, but it looks like the waiver claims that the Bears have put in, might not be like household names, but are more good quality depth that the Bears have had a chance to get some eyes on in the past. So we got who were the two guys that we signed?
They claimed Quindell Johnson from the Rams, who's a safety,
Safety.
and then Khalid Kareem, who was a defensive end from the Colts. Johnson was a rookie, so he's a rookie undrafted free agent.
Oh, okay.
Kareem has been has this will be his 4th year in the league,
Yeah.
but never has really had a chance. But yeah. That anytime you're talking about waiver claims, you're never really talking about like needle movers. You're hoping that these guys can be good depth special teams guys, and if they give you anything in terms of if Kareem gets some sacks or Johnson gets a pick, like that's just icing on the cake. But
Yeah.
you just want them to kind of fill a role and do their job. And I think both that those guys can do that. I mean, I haven't had a chance to watch all of their games, but I did watch a good amount of them, both of those guys today, and I came away impressed for the most part. But some things that were things they need to work on. Obviously, these are guys who were just cut, so
Yeah.
you're
Exactly.
not claiming studs here. But yeah, I think both guys are pretty good. And kind of back to the quarterback situation, I wanted to just go back to that really quickly with Beige. I agree with you. I think they cut Peterman because they knew figured if they cut Bajent, then he would get claimed. So you
Right.
cut Peterman. He hasn't been brought back to the practice squad yet. I'd imagine they're letting him kind of feel out other places. He might, find a better spot somewhere else. But my guess is that he's going to be back in the practice squad. They mentioned that they want to get a veteran quarterback in there, which makes complete sense. And like you mentioned with the new rules, it makes complete sense to have 3 quarterbacks on your 53-man roster. But we saw a lot of teams like the Patriots really only have 1 quarterback on their roster right now, and I think that comes from you can add those quarterbacks later on. The guys that were with you all through camp, they're not going to go anywhere. They'll still be available. You can bring them back, but you can maybe keep a guy on your roster that at this point you thought could have gotten claimed. So the little bit of gamesmanship there.
Yeah, I don't know how it's exactly represented with the with that extra QB rule. Like if they're technically considered to be a practice squad player, or if it's like a whole nother like kind of slot as a whole.
Yeah.
But it's despite the fact that Bajent got this win and made the 53-man roster. Poles and Eberflus were kind of asked about that and given a chance to, basically say, hey, congrats to the kid, he'll be the backup. And both times they were kind of wary to do so. It does seem that their intention would be to couple it with a veteran. Based on some of the ways that Poles talked about it today, it could be that maybe they're not even really targeting Peterman, as a first option, and maybe like hoping that he'll be around as a bring back if he's there. But I would imagine that the Bears aren't exactly done looking at that room as of yet. It just seems from they could have just said, "Hey, yeah, Bajan's the backup," and we're looking to add a veteran to the room, but they really didn't. So I would imagine that they're still trying to add some competition to that room.
For sure. Yeah, it might not be Peterman, but I'm guessing when it's all said and done, it will be Peterman because it makes sense to go. I mean, Peterman's not going to be handed a backup job somewhere or definitely not a starting job somewhere. So it makes sense for him to come back to the team that he was with all training camp and he knows the playbook and everything. So it just seems to make sense. But yeah, it could be someone else. Colt McCoy's out there. I know he's a guy with a lot of experience as a backup. It doesn't really matter who it is to me because if that guy's playing, the season's over. So I don't really care. Whoever they think is going to help Justin Fields the most. So they did acquire another player in an attempt to help Justin Fields, and that was the trade for Dan Feeney, the center guard from the Dolphins. So he started a lot of games for the Chiefs years ago, went to the Jets for a few years as a reserve player, was with the Dolphins in training camp. They actually signed a $3 million deal this offseason, which isn't small, which isn't but he didn't make the Dolphins, so the Bears traded a 6th-round pick for him, which was a little surprising given that they had the first waiver claim. Feeney himself wouldn't have been subject to waivers, but they could have claimed any offensive lineman that got cut that still was that didn't qualify for a vested veteran. So it was a little interesting that they didn't just go that route by claiming someone and instead targeted Dan Feeney and gave up a 6th-round pick to get him, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that much, but they could have had a guy for free. I have no problem with it, though. It is just a 6th-round pick. You can get that back so easily just by trading down once in the draft. You can pick up a 6th-round pick. You trade back in the 3rd round, you pick up a 6th-round pick. So it's not really anything. So it does seem like he might has a chance to start because with Tevin Jenkins going to IR, which is another big news of the day, which we should talk about, but that's going to shift Cody Whitehair over to left guard, and then it's going to be Feeney or Lucas Patrick at center. And I honestly don't know which one I prefer.
Yeah, I mean, Feeney looks like a dude. I guess he grew up as a Bears fan, which it seems like this regime loves. I don't know how
I feel about that. If that's a good or a bad thing.
I don't know how it works as a vested veteran. I guess maybe there's a chance that he would have flown over waivers and gone straight to the free agent pool, and in that case, the Bears might have reckoned it was worth a 6th-round pick to keep the decision out of Dan's hands, kind of thing.
That's what would have happened if he would have just gotten released. He would have just been a free agent right away.
Yeah, so that probably makes sense for them. Hopefully he'll end up being a quality depth piece. I don't think if you have Dan Feeney starting that you love it, and it's unfortunate that he's probably going to be penciled in a spot where we're seeing probably our best offensive lineman miss the first 4 weeks of the season, so obviously not great. But the silver lining is that we've had some issues with injuries all offseason, and it was starting to look kind of grim about the skeleton crew we might be rolling out week 1. But as far as Poles and Eberflus have said the last couple of days, it looks like, as far as who you would assume to be the starters of the 53-man roster, Tevin Jenkins is probably going to be the only one that won't make it for week 1. So while that's unfortunate, I think that's actually pretty promising as far as, I think that getting that whole defensive back room together is awesome. And it
Hmm.
looked like Brisker and Jackson were missing some time there. I think getting the defensive line together is going to be a big one, especially with like Ngakwe now rounding out that group.
Hmm.
But it definitely hurts to not have Tevin. I mean, we'll probably see Feeney go in and start. It's unfortunate because I think you and I both would agree it would have been nice to see something from Carter, especially considering he's flashed a little in the preseason, and he's been here
Yeah.
2 years, and he knows the system, and the coaches have a good idea about who he is. So the fact that they were willing to make this move for Feeney at this time, might be a little bit of a representation of what they think about Carter at the moment. But in fairness, you can't expect everyone to be like a Braxton Jones type, where you take a late round flyer and he happens to be like a starting quality player. Even the way that Carter's impressed just in like supplemental time has been fine. But obviously, the Feeney move means that behind Tevin Jenkins and behind Nate Davis, the Bears probably aren't the most confident in the depth that they have in that
Yeah.
interior line.
For sure, yeah, it is definitely a bummer for to see Tevin Jenkins out. It's a bummer for Jenkins too because I was really looking forward to him kind of building off of last year. But yeah, like you said, in the grand scheme of things, if you're missing if you of your 22 starters, you go through all training camp and preseason and you're only down one. It's not that bad, and he's hopefully only out 4 weeks, which it
Yeah,
sounds like he will be because it sounds like this they kind of were had one toying with the idea of maybe not putting him on IR.
right.
So 4 weeks, that's it, and then hopefully he's back there. Yeah, with Carter, I would have liked to see kind of Carter get an opportunity there. Like even if you do make the trade for Feeney, I think his best position is center. So he'd be like your backup center, and then
Right.
you have Whitehair at center, and then move Carter over to left guard. I would have liked to see that because I think maybe Jatira Carter's never a starter, but you don't really know that until he gets that opportunity. I think
Right.
he's clearly shown that he belongs in the league and belongs in a 53-man roster. But you don't know if he's more than that until you give him an opportunity. And like, when is he gonna get? If not now, when is he gonna get that opportunity? So that was a little disappointing to see. But like you said, yeah, maybe like you said, maybe they're not as high on him as we thought they were. So, but
Yeah.
that's definitely interesting. But I did watch a little bit of Dan Feeney, and I would say like again, this is not like a full scouting report. I watched like a game and a half, so grain of salt. But I thought he looked pretty good. I mean, he was moving well,
Yeah.
strong. Like I just based on that, I saw more from him than I saw from Lucas Patrick last year.
Right.
I'd say.
Yeah.
Um, again, don't think he's going to be a game changer or anything, but better than Lucas Patrick is the bar I was looking for, and I think I saw that. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how they have that rotation. Um, and what their plan is there.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, from what I can see too, I didn't watch a whole lot, and I don't even know if I would say I watched a full game's worth. But from the clips I could find, scrounging through Twitter, it looks like his high end tape is probably better than anything Lucas does. There are moments when he
Yeah.
looks really good, and I wouldn't say he takes over, but has games or stretches where he's really dominant in the run game or really dominant in the pass game. So it's nice to think that hey, he has that upside, and competition is always good. And as much as it's unfortunate that maybe the Bears aren't as high on Carter as maybe we would have hoped they would be, I will say that a lot of the moves around the deadline do kind of lead you to believe that, a lot, like very unlike last year, uh, Eberflus and Poles really think that this team can compete. If they still thought, hey, there's some growing to be done this year, but maybe 2024 is really our window, you could see maybe them going into the season fine with Bajent being the quarterback too, or you could see them being willing to try and let Carter get some of those game reps if they thought, you know, we're trying to find like the players of the future. But if you think you have a chance to win now and you're trying to maximize your opportunities to win now, you do things like go get a vet quarterback. You do
Mhm.
things like trade for a veteran depth at guard. You do things like like I was blanked on something that was like a pretty obvious option. But either way, it really does look like the Bears, based on the moves they're making at this deadline, believe that they have a team that's able to compete this year, and they don't want to forego that opportunity to try and leverage a better future.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. That's their thought process. They don't want to send out well, he's not a rookie, but a young guy out there when they can get a veteran. Or
Yeah.
maybe it was just a situation where they saw an opportunity to get a guy for a 6th-round pick, a guy who think they at worst is good depth, and they say, hey, we like Carter, but like this is just a good opportunity to round out the group.
Yep.
So who knows exactly what they're thinking. Either way, I don't think it's a bad move by any means. It's a 6th-round pick. Who cares? We'll get that back by trading down. It was interesting that they decided to keep Doug Kramer on the roster because Doug Kramer is just like a center only guy, which is not that big of a deal. But when you have Cody Whitehair, Dan Feeney, and Lucas Patrick who can all play center, does it make sense to have a 4th center on the roster? It's interesting. I bet wouldn't be surprised because I know he had the hand injury if he gets put on IR at some point,
Yeah.
and then you bring someone else up or something, and then that's when you sign Nathan Peterman or another quarterback to the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bears were high on Kramer.
Mhm.
I thought the injury kind of sealed his fate as far as maybe being a practice squad guy, that they would, maybe let them know that, hey, you're probably the first call we make if we need to elevate an interior offensive line.
Right.
But them keeping him, and one probably means that maybe they don't love the idea of having to use Whitehair or Patrick at center, or at least they would, in a perfect world, would be able to have one of those available for another position. And then, if that's the case, you want to make sure you have 2 centers or at least some center depth.
Yeah.
But it would be one of those things where, as far as when I first looked over the roster, Kramer to me seemed like one of those people that would be the first man out the door if the Bears found a spot for someone else.
Yeah, that's kind of my assessment as well. I've been on the record. I'm not a huge fan. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Kramer. I know a lot of people really like him. I haven't really seen a whole lot from him to warrant a roster spot, but I do think they clearly like him, or maybe they thought he was the guy who might get claimed if they waived him right at the deadline when everyone's kind of scouring the waiver wire. So maybe that's why they wanted to kind of sneak him through and waive him later on. That way, and you have less of a chance of losing him, but then you can stash him on the practice squad.
Yeah, I saw a stat today that said only 2% of players that get waived end up being claimed, which was, I guess it makes sense, but it was definitely interesting to see. So there's probably a fallacy to always be like, oh, this guy definitely could have got waived. But by the same merit, Kramer did have a good preseason, and whether or not they actually thought he would get claimed, it was probably one of those things where, if you're going to err on the side of caution, it's probably just worth, if we have the spot, letting them ride for now because they like what they saw on him, and maybe can push that decision down the road a little bit as to whether or not he's going to be actually in that active roster when the time comes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it was.
It was exciting. I mean, it was a busy offseason. There was a lot of expected turnover with the resources that we had and with, the holes that we knew were there. So it's cool to now have an idea of what the 2023 Bears really will look like. I think, we had an idea going into training camp and things like that, but being that we had that first waiver and being that, injuries happen and things like that and trades happen, it's cool to, we're like 10 days out from week 1 and the roster's really starting to take shape, especially with how healthy they are. It's really easy to kind of see, okay, this is what the team's going to look like, and these are the people we're relying on this year.
For sure. Other thing I do really want to talk about is on the other side of the ball, the defensive line, because I think that was kind of probably the most interesting aspect, or maybe the interesting position group to look at. You kind of when that's were going in. So the whole last couple of weeks were, are they going to keep Terrell Lewis? Are they going to keep Travis Gibson? Both of them are really playing well. Well, spoiler that they decided to keep neither of them. They waived Travis Gibson right away, and then they waived Terrell Lewis when they claimed Khalid Kareem. So that was I thought that was interesting because both those guys played well, and especially with Gibson, I thought maybe you could get a late round pick for him. They did say that he did not demand a trade like it was reported, and Gibson said that too. But then he went unclaimed, so maybe there wasn't really a market there for him. But I do think it was interesting when you had two guys who played really well in the preseason, and then you release them to claim a guy from another team who, albeit also played really well in the preseason, but wouldn't you want to
Yeah.
go with like your guys? Like when you value, even if it isn't Travis Gibson, because they did say that part of the reason for releasing Travis Gibson was scheme fit, which makes sense. He is this, smaller end. It's more fit in a 3-4. But with Lewis, that's a guy that they brought into their defense, so they considered him a scheme fit, and he had a good preseason as well. So wouldn't you rather have your guy that you've been with all off season than a guy from another team? So that was just interesting to me. I'm not saying it's a bad move. I don't know. It's way too early to tell about that, but there's just kind of an interesting thought process by them.
Yeah, I mean, seeing Gibson go was an interesting one. I made a tweet about it, just saying, he looked like one of the best ends that we had, and there was no reason they had to move on from him, and he was still relatively cheap, so they could have
Right.
just run with him. But instead, they decided to try and influx, some more competition at that position and just move on from him. Terrell Lewis played good, and like he definitely had a chance to make the roster, and like you said, he made that initial one. But when you looked at that group, if there was ever a move to be made again, like you kind of knew he was going to be the odd man out. They had just signed Rasheem Green. They obviously like what they have in Dom Robinson, still on a rookie contract. DeMarcus Walker was kind of the big addition this offseason. I mean, him and Yannick Ngakoue. So, you had to kind of think he was one of those fringe players. It was surprising that he got waived for another end, especially when it didn't seem like, that was the market for it was really that strong. But the Bears had those joint practices with the Colts and played that game. So they got to see, what was it, Khalid?
Khalid Kareem.
They
Yeah.
got to see Kareem up close and personal, and then Poles had some comments about him today and said that there were some things about him that he liked, and it was your classic Poles stuff: long, athletic, hard-working football player.
Yeah.
So you got to trust that the Bears at least had some insider information and were familiar with his game and decided that despite how well Lewis looked and the ways that he flashed in the preseason, that Khalid Kareem was a better option for them.
Yeah, and it does. I think it does all come down to scheme fit and play style. Lewis and Gibson are both kind of listed in the 250 range. Kareem was listed at 268, I believe,
Right.
so much bigger, 34-inch arms, much longer than both those guys.
Such a
Um,
classic Poles. Like
Classic Poles edge setter. Um, he's going to play well against the run. Maybe he doesn't give you a lot of pass rush, but he's kind of, to me, is a backup to Rasheed Green. I kind of view them very similar. When I was watching Green when he was signed and I was watching Kareem today, it was kind of like I see a lot of similarities between these guys, both bigger, longer, not really that twitchy. I thought Kareem, showed a little bit probably more bend than Green, to be honest, but both are just bigger, more edge setters types than kind of the Gibson and Lewis, who were more bendy, athletic,
yeah.
Bend the edge, bend the corner, turn the corner, and get to after the quarterback guys. So
The pass rushing archetype.
yeah, just the more valuable thing that who wants that? Who wants guys who can sack the
Seriously.
quarterback? Like, no, not us.
No, at the end of the day, it's funny that it's something that it's going to be so important for us to talk about because that room is as weak as it is. Hopefully this time next year we won't be arguing about Khalid Kareem over Dom Robinson. Hopefully we'll influx a little bit more talent to that group. But as it stands, the Bears are shuffling their cards and trying to add talent to that group where they can. I think probably because everybody's pretty well aware that the pass rush and the front seven are likely the weakest aspect of the Bears right now. Front seven is a funny term because we play so much nickel that the linebackers are usually just going to be Edwards and Edmonds, and we likely won't have an issue with them, and they probably won't be the weak spot. But that front four,
Front four
Yannick Ngakoue is a bit of a star, and he can pretty consistently put up sack numbers, but I don't know if there's any one like real game changer, or even to some extent, I don't know if there's one player that you can't view as a liability here and there. So Bears trying to add competition to that room, and it looked like that was kind of the case with a lot of the moves they did here at the deadline.
Yep. Yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. It's going to be the weakest position for this entire team, the defensive
Yeah.
line. Everyone's been talking about it. It's not just us. I mean, pass rush is going to be hard to come by again this year. Hopefully, they can do a little bit of better against the run with Billings kind
Yep.
of in there, and
Billings has looked
Walker.
impressive, man. I'm excited for him, to be honest.
Yeah. So it just is what it is. You're just not going to have a great pass rush this year.
Yeah.
And it's a
that's
shame
going to
because
hold them back. But
it's a shame because I think that the Bears back four, like I think their defensive backfield has a chance to be really, really good this year. And it's pretty easy to erase a great backfield with no pass rush. I don't care how good you are at coverage. You can't play coverage for 12 seconds kind of thing.
yeah, I think it works both ways though.
Definitely.
You can't cover if the front four is not getting pressure, and if the front four is getting pressure but they can't cover, it doesn't matter. So you need both. And
for
I
sure.
don't know if they have both.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think probably they'll do a good job of hiding some of those inadequacies throughout the season. But with players like Jaquan Brisker and like Eddie Jackson that are playmakers, man, like it's nice to at least pair them with one or two really dangerous pass rushers, because if you give them an opportunity to make a play, or even one or two times a game you make a quarterback make a rush decision, like those guys can make you pay for it. So it's unfortunate that there's not more competition in that room. The Yannick Ngakoue addition helped, and like it's funny to think about now, like how crazy bad that room would look without his addition. But as it stands, you kind of have to trust the process. There's a lot of good athletes in that room, and if maybe one or two of them really rise to the occasion this year, cream of the crop situation, then it could be a lot better than we're giving it credit for.
For sure. If we're moving back to the defensive backs, one thing I just want to point out is Josh Blackwell, who I know you really like. I really like too. Is another guy who made the roster, so that was good to see, because we've talked about how we thought he played well at the end of last year.
Seriously.
And he's good at special teams, so it's nice to see him making the team. Jalen Johnson was kind of Jalen Johnson and Josh Blackwell were both kind of that 5th, 6th corner, which I think was kind of like Jalen Jones, yeah. So I think that was kind of like up for debate a little bit, but I think they made the right moves there. And then
I completely agree. I think that was a position group where I was like, you guys nailed it. Everybody I would have kept, I think they kept. So that was good to see. Blackwell, kind of like Carter in that, like every time he's played, man, he's flashed, and like I've thought that he's never looked like he wasn't up to the challenge. I think if Blackwell is in the game, or we're having to rely on him very, very heavily, something's probably gone wrong with how much we've invested at that position with some other premium resources. But I think he's a great player, and if he's your 4th or 5th best defensive back, honestly, I think he can't be doing too bad.
Yeah, you're in good shape there. So that was good to see. And then the last thing, just Quindell Johnson is the guy they claimed, and they then released A.J. Thomas, the safety. But we mentioned when we were doing our 53-man roster preview that we thought safety was a position that they were going to look at because there wasn't a lot of depth there. I thought that maybe they would bring in like more of a veteran guy, but it turns out they went with a rookie. But again, I'll just say, in the small sample size of games that I watched on Quindell Johnson, I was impressed. I thought he was pretty good, especially when moving downhill. I thought he was really good when he was asked to backpedal and cover the middle of the field. That's when he struggled a little bit. He's not an Eddie Jackson, that's not a knock on him. It's just, he's limited in who he is. He was an undrafted free agent, waiver wire claim. Like, he's limited in the things you can ask him to do. But if you ask him to do things that he's good at, which is coming downhill, playing close to the box, playing in the slot, then I think you could potentially have something there. Maybe next year, he needs to improve a little bit. But I think he's a guy who, if you put in the right position, can play in this league. And no, that was good to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to actually sit down in the middle of the field and strike fear into offenses as a safety is a fairly rare trait.
Yes.
Especially year over year. It's one of the hardest things. It's one of the least predictable aspects of the game of football is coverage ability, just because it's such a hard thing to do.
Right.
And, year over year, Eddie Jackson kind of, shows that despite how unpredictable it is, he consistently can be one of those guys that can do that. So if you're holding them to an Eddie Jackson standard, there's very few safeties in the NFL that are going to come out squeaky clean. But a really, really good depth piece. And like we said, it's a tough room because the two starters that we have, I love our starter group versus almost any other safety group in the league. But
Yeah.
just one injury down, I don't know if I love it, like any of the depth that we have. I can't believe the DHC left and it's still available right now.
Mhm.
But as it stands, that's why I think they probably made the Quindell Johnson move.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we won't have to see too much of him this year, and I mean that in the nicest way, Quindell. If you're listening, which you definitely are.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But
Big fan of the
yeah,
club.
it's that time when we have to discuss moves like Quindell Johnson. It's the
Yeah.
calm before the storm. We have what looks like the Bears, week 1 roster ready to go.
Yeah.
Only a couple of internal practices left. We're 10 days out.
Yeah. One other thing that I just completely blanked on when we started this, but they actually acquired one other player too. Trent Taylor, the returner from the Bengals. Yeah, from the Bengals. Not a waiver claim. That's why I forgot about him for a second there. But he was a vested veteran, so they actually had to sign him. But that also means that Trent Taylor agreed to come to the Bears. One of the better punt returners last year in football.
Fully.
So that was good to see. But obviously, they have some concerns about Velus Jones, considering that was really hit. That seemed kind of like his job to lose this offseason, and I think he lost it because he muffed a few punts, and now they brought someone in from the outside. But it's interesting because now, you have Trent Taylor in there to return punts. Velus Jones is still going to be your kick returner. I know they like him as an offensive weapon as well, but I tweeted this out, but like with the rule changes to the kick return, your kick returner position is really meaningless, to be honest. I mean, now they even made it now where if you call a fair catch inside the 5, it still goes out to the 25. Like that's another rule that they've implemented. Like you don't have to be real. Yeah. So every year they just implement a rule to get rid of it, to discourage kick returners. So why are you like wasting a spot on a kick returner? But anyway, I don't need to get on my soapbox too much, but I mean, they do have a legit punt returner now. A guy who maybe isn't going to break out a home run, but he's going to catch the ball. And he did average 10 yards per punt return last year, which is pretty good. His long was like 25 yards or something. So again, not like game breaking, not Devin Hester back there, but
no.
He can get some yards and make a few guys miss and at least get you a good field position. Yeah. So that's good.
Yeah, what's funny, man, is I think honestly, like the last couple of years, I've realized that we were really spoiled having Devin Hester. I think growing up, I was under the impression that punts get returned for touchdowns, like not all the time, but here and there, and it really happens way fewer than I think people realize. I think maybe it happened 2 or 3 times last year. So it's funny to say that Brown, that's his last name, Brown.
Taylor.
Taylor, averaged 10, but never had, one over 25. I think I saw a stat that said, despite, his range of outcomes really only being like roughly there, he still had the most returns over 10 yards in the league. So, if you're doing more than 10, pretty much a pop, you're doing your team a pretty good service. And
for sure,
that's nice because we're able to turn what looked like it might have been a weakness right now on the team into something where you can kind of set it and forget it and feel confident with.
Yeah. And he's not going to give you a lot as the wide receiver, but you don't really need that. And it also might be a situation where, because I think Poles said in the press conference that they want to get Velus Jones' confidence back up. So it might be a situation where he's your punt returner for the first 6 weeks, and then you waive him and then give Velus Jones another chance. Right. I don't know what's going to happen there, but I don't think we've seen Velus Jones return his last punt.
No.
For the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, Velus Jones, it's important to remember that was the first offensive player that Poles picked. So despite, Poles seeming pretty good about moving on from bad decisions pretty quickly in other areas, it really looks like they're determined to give Velus Jones every opportunity he has to find some success. And to that, like you said, every year the kick return is getting less and less valuable and less important. But by the same merit, I mean, you watched the games last year too. There's something to be said about Velus on those kick returns and just Velus as a whole when he has his ball in his hand. And as much as it feels like you're kind of drinking the Kool-Aid by saying this and trying to justify another opportunity for him, I really do think if you can get the ball in his hands, if you can manufacture touches for him, Velus Jones is like a big play waiting to happen. So if he can't feel the punt just for whatever reason at the moment, I don't think he really was a punt returner when he was at Tennessee. I think, he was always kind of was that kick returner guy. But if that's his role, and then you manufacture 2 or 3 touches for him, every week, it's not exactly what you want out of a 3rd-round pick. But
it is what it is.
Exactly.
I know, and I agree with you. I know there's a lot of people who wanted to see him get released. I'm willing to give him one more chance.
Me too.
I think this is it. Like if he doesn't do something offensively this year, then he's firmly on the roster bubble next year. But I don't think we can say right now that he's not going to be a factor on offense. Like you said, you can manufacture a few touches for him a game. He can still kind of stretch the field vertically. He can take a screen pass and go 80 yards. He still has that in his toolbox. So let's give him one more chance. And then, after this year, if he still doesn't show anything, then they gotta just cut their losses and move on.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's probably got to do a little bit too with the fact that they like him as a person, and he seemed like he's always been a pretty stand-up guy and about his business and a hard worker. Whenever he's had the chance to talk, or he's been talked about by some of his peers, but at the end of the day, man, you got to have it's a very narrow 53-man roster, and if you're going to make it, you got to have a purpose in the team. And
sure,
if I can appreciate trying to manufacture touches for him, but eventually, you'd rather have someone on the roster that can get open and get the ball and necessitate the ball themselves. So we'll see. As much as it looks like the Bears are trying to position themselves to compete this year, I think there still is a little bit of them that are trying to give some younger players some opportunities to grow. So maybe that's what we're seeing with Velus. But I agree. I would say that his leash is getting, incredibly short.
Right. Yeah, and in terms of them competing this year, I mean, Ryan Poles said it at a press conference. He said we think we have 75 to 80% of our roster figured out. Or I shouldn't say roster figured out, positions we feel good about. So that leaves a pretty big chunk of positions that they don't really feel that great about. And if you're, the Chiefs and Bills aren't saying 75, 80%, they're saying 95, 100%.
The Bills, man, that roster is if that head coach came out and said, hey, we feel good about 85% of the roster, there's some really good players on that team that'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Exactly. So I think that kind of shows what they think of this year. They're not trying. I mean, they're always trying to win a Super Bowl, but they're not expecting to win a Super Bowl, or even potentially not even expecting to make the playoffs. Based on that I think that gave a lot more information to me, at least in my mind, than I think Poles wanted to, and maybe Poles intended to.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction is he's probably right. I can kind
of I agree. I mean,
there are vacuous holes at a couple positions that aren't a fireable offense, especially when you're trying to do a rebuild the right way. But it's glaring, and I almost like that Poles says, "Hey, listen, I know it's not easy to try and revamp and make a roster competitive top down in a year or 2 years, but by the same merit." I do think that they think this team can be competitive, but there's probably a little bit of that, we get compared to the Eagles all the time just because of their development with Hurts. But there's something valuable about being a team that can grind and make the playoffs, even if maybe Poles doesn't believe that down the stretch and into January and February they have the roster depth to compete with some of those amazing teams that we talked about. It doesn't mean that they don't think that they have maybe the opportunity to beat up on the guys in the NFC North and slide into the playoffs and gain that experience for next year, where I think most Bears fans, or at least Bears fans that aren't naive and always, thinking the Super Bowl is a year away, most Bears fans would think that's actually when our window should really start to open.
Definitely. For sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's important to know they might be 75, 80% now, but at this time last year, I wonder what that number was at in their mind, because I think there were positions last year, starting positions last year, where I think we had guys who were not good at all, not even 53-man roster good. Now we're talking about guys who might be starters who are okay, that guy's a good depth piece and we have to start him. So it's a slight upgrade, baby steps. And then maybe hopefully next year, I mean, by next year, they better be 90, 95, 100% confident in all the positions. There's really no more excuses at that point. They'll have another draft. They'll have more money to spend. and they'll still have a lot of money next year. So next year, if he's still saying 75-80%, then man, they screwed up. But
Totally. Yeah, I mean, if it like to that point last year when we were combing the waivers, we were combing for players like Armin Watts that, despite your opinion on Armin Watts, week 1 was basically a starter.
right.
And then
Yeah,
this
exactly.
year we're doing a similar thing, but other than maybe punt returner, all the pieces that you've added are quality depth. And
Right.
then hopefully by next year when the waiver wire comes around, we'll be in a place that said we don't need someone else's cast offs. We really
Right.
don't.
Yeah, ideally, we're not claiming anyone next year.
Seriously, yeah, a great team, but makes the waiver like priority stuff a lot less exciting. And if you're getting excited about the waiver priority, it probably means that your roster is not exactly where it needs to be.
Exactly. But hopefully next year we won't. Hopefully next year we don't have a waiver wire show.
No, and to your point, like last year, kind of the waiver wire stuff was exciting, and
It
I
was.
found
They
myself talking
six
myself,
guys.
Armin Watts and Smith Marquette and things like that. And then this year, I was maybe I was a little bit like I was thinking like in the last year's point of view, and we had that first waiver, and it was exciting, and then it kind of came and went, and I was like, maybe we didn't have like the holes that we thought, and the fact that I was even excited about it last year is a little bit more telling about where we were last year than like where we are this year. So
Yeah.
last year we were getting real excited about our waiver claims, and we won 3 games, and
Right.
this year I could tell that not everybody was a little bit less enthused with all of these moves, which means your roster is a little bit more locked in, and hopefully could do a little bit better than a 3 game and 3 wins in a year.
For sure. All right. Did we?
What else?
I think we covered all the guys that we acquired, unless I forgot someone else. But I'm pretty sure we covered them all.
Yeah.
Anything else we missed?
Not really. There was a little bit of smoke around Chris Jones in the last little bit, but it doesn't.
Chris Jones. There was the Mooney trade rumors, which weren't. I don't know if they weren't. Okay, so it was funny because the Mooney trade rumors were something that PFF Brad brought up, and I know that if Brad is mentioning something, that he's not just pulling it out of thin air. He heard it from somewhere. I don't know where, but he heard it from. He had to have heard it from somewhere.
Especially if it's about the Bears, because to some extent, Brad actually does have such a good just like football sense that his ability to infer and like look at how things may play out even without insider information is pretty remarkable. And usually how even like contract projections and things, it's very rare that Brad is off the mark. But then on top of that, for it to be the Bears, his favorite team and a team that he probably has some people a little bit closer to the building. If that Mooney thing came out, it didn't mean that maybe Mooney was being shopped, or it didn't mean that Mooney was disgruntled, but it definitely did mean that there was something there. So and even Poles like did shoot it down and did say, we won't be trading Mooney. But he prefaced that comment by saying, we will always have these conversations to make our roster better. So it could have been that maybe there were some calls about people kicking the tires on it, or it could have been that maybe Poles called some competitors that could use some receiver depth, someone maybe like the Bills or something like that, to see if they'd be interested in Mooney. And it could also just be that maybe they were doing those contract talks, and someone like a Cole Kmet signs, and then Mooney's on the outside looking in, and maybe he had a moment of frustration with his contract. But despite all that, and despite the fact that there may have actually been some smoke around that fire, Mooney remained.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was interesting the way that Poles kind of worded it, because he didn't completely shut it down like you said. He said we're always entertaining things, and then he also said we're not. I forget exactly what he said, but he said something like we're not trading Darnell Mooney.
Yeah.
It's not that they didn't get calls, or he didn't potentially ask to be traded or anything like that. He didn't shoot. He just said we're not trading him. But yeah, I mean, everyone knows that Darnell Mooney is looking to get a new contract. Every player who's on the last year of their deal is looking to get a new contract. That's not exclusive to Darnell Mooney. This could have been a negotiating tactic. This could have been a lot of things. But the fact it is out there does not necessarily mean it's going to happen, but it does probably mean that something happened. So
yeah,
I don't think he's going to get traded. I do think he's eventually going to be signed to a contract.
Yeah. I would say that like the stuff about the trade coming out has probably lowered my expectations of the chances of him re-signing. You know, I thought
Hmm.
for sure
Sure.
he was going to end up a Bear, and maybe now there's a little bit of a rift. I can understand the house, like how like this, the Mooney trade conversation comes together. Mooney is going into a contract year, and
Yeah.
if he's trying to earn himself an opportunity to make more money, if he's not happy with what he's being offered now, then performing well is important, and the Bears having revamped the receiver room, there's a lot of mouths to feed there. So he could think to himself, if I want to make money, I'd like to go somewhere where there's more opportunity,
Right.
or maybe maybe he just didn't like the number that was offered to him by the Bears brass, because I would imagine that at least at this point in those negotiations, there have been some numbers bounced around.
I think yeah, they're both in a tough situation because Mooney is coming off a pretty serious injury. It seems like he's healthy. He's played in the preseason. It's not like he's been out, but you still as the Bears want to see him produce post injury and see him
Totally.
with Justin Fields, and now that DJ Moore is there, kind of see him do that. And then once that happens, they might feel more comfortable coming up with their offer. And from Mooney's point of view, he's a 1,000-yard receiver a few years ago. He wants to be paid like that, and I can see where the disconnect is right now. But
Yeah, totally.
I think after 6-7 weeks of the new offense, if things go according to plan and Mooney's looking good, I think the Bears will be willing to come up a little bit more, especially since he has such a good relationship with Justin Fields.
Yeah, and I would
if
imagine that's
Fields,
probably part of it.
yeah, if Fields goes to them and says, "I want Mooney," and assuming Fields is playing well, and which we think he will, and he goes to them and says, "I want Mooney to be here for the long haul," then they're gonna give him a contract. Just is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if Fields is playing well, all of the moves that the Bears have done in the last 2 years with this new regime make sense, and it all starts to work out. So, without a doubt, if Fields was playing well and then said, "Hey, like I want him here," they would work to make that work. But it is a little interesting because Mooney is so close with Fields, and because like he's always been such a hard worker, and like was doing what it takes to get better. And then when Poles came in and was kind of asked to talk about the people he thought were like attitude and like leaders within that locker room, and early and often Poles has always been singing Mooney's praises. So it could be that Mooney heard some of that and thought he was going to get in a certain number, and then maybe because of the injury and because of the down year, the Bears try to be a little bit more conservative and offer him something else, and maybe they got a little bit farther apart than they were close, and some of this trade talk stuff came up. But as it stands, and based on the way that Poles addressed it today, because Poles isn't really like Poles won't really lie, as much as maybe he'll sometimes dodge a question. He doesn't really tell, like he won't say something and then go back on it. So for him to say there that Mooney's not going to be traded, maybe the idea was bounced around, maybe them and the team like decided to look at what a world would look like if they did do that, but it seems now that Mooney is definitely going to be here for at least the 2023 season, and I'm not sure that it's until like depending on how the Bears perform, it's not something that they can really worry about until they go put it on the field.
For sure. We'll I'm sure it's not the last we'll hear about it. Something else will pop up, and it'll be kind of a ongoing storyline over the course of the year, and maybe potentially into the offseason as well.
I mean, I hope what you said is exactly right. I hope we get 5 or 6 weeks in, and Mooney proves that he's the perfect kind of second option to someone like a Darnell Mooney, which I think he is. Someone to a DJ Moore, which I think he is. Like I think people are going to get a really good reminder of how good Darnell Mooney's straight line deep speed is this year, and then on top of that, like how much the respect they'll have to give him for that is going to change the way they're able to defend him and DJ when they're on the field together.
Yeah.
If we can get anything out of Chase Claypool, man, we really should have a pretty impressive offense.
Yeah. I mean, I drafted Darnell Mooney in fantasy. He's on my bench, so I'm hoping that he has a little bit of a bounce back.
Nice.
All right. Anything
else? No, I don't think so. Like we were saying, man, it feels like now is a bit of the calm before the storm.
About 10 days away from Bears Packers.
Yeah.
7 days away from the start of the regular season.
Chiefs Lions is a funny little weird game. Lions are officially one of those teams that the NFL is using for fun games. Is that where they're at?
I mean, that's gonna be a fun game because it's either the Lions are gonna go in and kind of shock the world and beat the Chiefs,
Or
or the Chiefs are gonna stomp them, and that'll be fun to watch too. So
no, for sure. I mean, the path to the playoffs this year for the Bears, 100% is going to have to go through the NFC North if it happens. So,
well, yeah.
every one of those games that we see these other teams lose is going to matter more this year than it did last year. Thinking about being in the middle of the tank. And I don't know about you, dude, but it feels like this time of year, heading into September, heading into the season, that like how contentious it is between the NFC North fan bases is more than it ever has been. Maybe it's because it doesn't feel like any one team has like a really strong claim to who's going to be wearing the crown at the end of the season. But man, is it ever like, it's pretty. A lot of the teams in the NFC North believe that they could be the guys, which makes for a fun year.
No, that's exactly what it is. Like, you could make the argument for all four teams. You could make an argument for all four teams to be the best team in the division, and like it's hard to argue with any of them. It's like, totally. I could see that happening, sure. So that's it does make it a little bit more contentious. It also just makes it more fun.
Totally,
it's gonna be fun throughout the year. Just John with the other teams in the NFC North, and hopefully we have a lot more shit to talk than we have in years past.
I know, seriously.
But
last year we had to get so good at just being like, all right, you guys wait. We're trying to do this the right way.
Yeah, last year it was we suck, but we're gonna have the first overall pick and we're gonna feel good. So now we got to put our money where our mouth is, and
totally
see that strategy tanking worked, and now we're on the right path. But we'll do like a week one season preview next week, and we can get to kind of all that.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe we should do if it would be worth looking in and seeing if there isn't someone from Packerville that we could have a split one for the like a preview show for week one.
Yeah,
as long as
I might ask.
Do you? Yeah, I mean, as long as it's in good spirits, it'd be cool to have someone on their side and like you said, tell the story of why might the Packers be good, because I happen to think that we're gonna pound them week one, and honestly, I don't even want to think about a universe where we don't. Yeah. But as it stands, I really do think that we're going to give those Packers a run in week one. And, man, 10 days, it can't come any sooner. When was the last time you were this excited for the start of a season?
Last year, probably. No, I don't know. Probably like 2019.
2019, just following 2018.
Yeah, and then being crushed immediately.
Oh, dude, I know. I remember that offseason, and like I think you'd agree, and I think you're similar in that like we're fairly level-headed fans. Like we're not like the rah Bears can beat anybody guy if they can. If a game's close, obviously, you get a little delusional. But last year I didn't have any like preconceived notions of how great we would be. But man, going into 2019, I was all in. I really thought, you know what, we're actually going to do it. We really will win the Super Bowl.
I was all in, and then I've never been all out faster. I think I was giving up hope at halftime. Maybe even before there. I was just like, this isn't it. You could just tell right away, like, this isn't it.
It was poison, man. Yeah. It was such an ugly game. It ended up being like it was like 7-3 or 10-7 or something. It was brutal. Yeah, it was bad. So hopefully a little different this year.
Hopefully we get a higher note this year. All right. I think that's good for today. Thank you everyone for listening. This episode was brought to you by 366 Golf. Make sure to use the code I don't have the graphic today, but use the code in the description to get 15% off your order. Also, just use code CFC at checkout to get the same discount. Thanks for CFC for sponsoring it. Thanks everyone for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, share. Really appreciate everyone's support. Follow on Twitter too, because we'll be tweeting all of our thoughts on game day, during the week, everything. Definitely want to give us both a follow, especially Luke. Luke has way too few followers for how good of a follow.
Seriously, join the squad, everybody. You like it?
Yeah. Follow Luke too. Follow everyone, and we'll talk to everyone next week. Bear down.
Cheers. Bear down, everybody.